Hello, and welcome to the presentation by Team 10. Our presentation is on Professor Amanda Driscoll's paper, Bolivia's Democracy in Transition, More Questions and Answers in 2016. We start with our introduction. In 2016, a survey conducted in Bolivia showed that Bolivian elites saw the country as a democracy in transition. During that year, Bolivia experienced advances in democratic efforts and poverty alleviation. However, they also had social unrest and challenges to the legitimacy within party structures. The president at the time, Evo Morales, and his movement to Socialism Party also agreed with Bolivian elites that Bolivia was on its path to a stage of democracy. They claimed that the progress Bolivia had had throughout the last years was solely credited to President Morales and would end if he was not voted again for the fourth time in 2019. President Morales and his party attempted to amend the constitution to allow for continuous presidential re-election. They scheduled a referendum that actually backfired, with the majority of voters voting against the constitutional revision. This was a historical vote in Bolivia because, after a decade, President Morales and his party lost an election. This was a pivotal event that led to social changes and the removal of the Movement to Socialism Party and the beginning of democratization in Bolivia. But what led to this unprecedented event after a decade of voting in favor of President Morales? Why did Bolivian citizens vote against him? And how did this event lead to the democratization of Bolivia? In the following slides, we will discuss the events that led to this unusual election.
The foundations of the 2019 vote can be seen by 2016. In 2016, after several years of a drop in the international price of hydrocarbons and metals, Bolivia suffered a lot of internal unrest. Workers from the extraction center faced cut hours, lowered pay, and a closing of many of the extraction firms, leading to substantial unrest from that department. Bolivia's central government also lost a significant portion of their revenue as income from royalties, taxes, and licensing deals decreased. As that sector shrunk, the Bolivian public debt increased significantly. At the same time, on paper, Bolivia looked like it was still doing well. It boasted a 3.8% growth in GDP. The volume of exports increased 9.1%. A realized gain in the export sector was actually 7.5% due to the lower international price of hydrocarbons and metals. And a robust commodities market led to the dropping of the moderate and extreme poverty by 22% since 2000. And average labor income increased over 33% in the same period.
After the presidential election of 2015, Evo Morales and his Movement for Socialism Party was voted into office for a third term, along with Vice President Alvaro Garcia Linera. The ministerial composition was also fully reconstructed and placed new heads on many positions. Within the legislation, there was a plurinational assembly that consisted of a bicameral legislature of 130 deputies and 36 senators. This mixed system allowed for election to the lower house with uninominal and closed list PR vote systems. In the legislature, MAS, or the Movement for Socialism Party, consistently won the higher vote percentage. In 2015, they held 68% of the deputy and 69% of the Senate. Typically, the legislature is separate from the executive, but in Bolivia, it is well known among citizens that it is just an extension of the executive. Citizens feel that the executive concentrates and consolidates power, making the system of checks and balances and the separation of powers fall away. The judiciary situation in Bolivia has gone from bad to worse since 2011. Implementing elections was supposed to help democratize the judiciary, but in 2016, it was still a dysfunctional institution with a lack of public confidence. The Judicial Summit of 2016 was supposed to reform the judicial system and ease the concerns of the citizens. The summit brought together multiple non-state actors like the justice sector, civil society, social movements, and the academy to collaborate on reform. There they formed a 6-point agenda: constitutional maintenance of direct election of judges, improving access to the justice system, improving efficiency and speedy resolution of trials, combating corruption, reform educational training of judges and political professionals, and constitutionalize life imprisonment for the sexual violation of minors. Nevertheless, the six-point agenda was barely implemented due to the skepticism of the opposition against Morales. They feared that opening the 2009 Constitution would lead to an increase in Morales' power. Opposition leaders generally failed to make an impact because they could not congregate on a mass political platform. Opposition votes were split among the candidates due to the two-round system. Also, MAS had the power to discredit opposition leaders, even leading some of them to flee the country. The electoral system is also a cause for the undermining of opposition. The increase in Senate seats from 3 to 4 and the percentage of the president's vote share has ensured MAS control. The February referendum, as discussed in the following slides, serves as an important informational signal which has unified the opposition coalition. When presented with a single coherent narrative, an absolute majority of voters has denied Morales the opportunity to stand for office again.
President Evo Morales tried to change the Constitution to allow for perpetual presidential reelection in the 2016 nationwide referendum. The vote failed, however, with 48% of the population voting yes and 51% voting no. This was a huge upset since the MAS party won the 2014 presidential election with 61% of the vote. The traditional MAS strongholds in the Andes experienced diminishing support between the vote in 2014 and 2016, going from an average of 85% of the vote to 70%. The reason for the electoral shift can be attributed to various factors, mainly speculative. One explanation was the Casa Zapata scandal, which aired on media just days before the election. The scandal was about an unknown child that Morales supposedly had with a prominent businesswoman and manager for a Chinese corporation. This scandal also had the accusations of influence peddling leveled against Morales. Eventually, however, it was discovered that the child never existed, but the damage was already done. President Morales himself blamed local mayors, saying that the voters were rebelling against them for recent corruption. And many MAS-aligned social movements suggested that was because of the national leadership failing to engage meaningfully with grassroots leaders. The article uses 3 reports to track MAS support in the last 15 years, including 2014 presidential vote, 2010 mayoral vote, and a 2006 Constituent Assembly vote. Additionally, maps have tracked municipalities with large mining facilities, indigenous populations, access to internet and television were also used. The top municipalities that voted most in favor of Morales in 2014 voted negatively on the referendum, while those most against him voted a bit more favorably than before, but still, for the most part, very negative. That also shows that mining unions and indigenous communities possibly mobilized voters against the referendum, causing sharp declines in support. People with internet access tended to vote along with MAS party line, while those with television access tended to vote, again, suggesting that those with televisions had more exposure to the Casa Zapata scandal. Overall, the data suggests that the MAS constituency is generally displeased with the party's recent scandals and policy. The miners and indigenous population may feel left behind by the national leadership lately and thus voted against MAS. The constituency with better socioeconomic conditions may have been disenchanted with the party after repeated exposure to their scandals and misadministration reported constantly by the media on television. There is, however, no single concrete explanation for referendum failure, but statistics can help give us a general idea of what caused it and what eventually led to the 2019 election crisis.
Despite these February referendum results, in which the people made it very clear they did not support a 4th consecutive term of presidency, the MAS has stated that they are still dedicated to overseeing Bolivia in its state as a democracy in transition, and have made it very clear their intent to present President Morales as their 2019 presidential candidate. The MAS has actually developed 4 ways in which they can secure this 4th candidacy and undermine the time limit rules. The first of which is organizing a 2nd constitutional referendum. This would only be permitted if they get a significant number of signatures from citizens' approval. The Cocoa Growers Union from Morales' home department have already initiated action to obtain these signatures, but there are already many claims from the opposition that this is an unconstitutional act. The MAS also holds a supermajority in the Plurinational Assembly, so they actually have the jurisdiction to rewrite the Constitution in their favor. However, this approach would most likely receive an overwhelmingly negative response from not only domestic and also international actors. President Morales could also resign shortly before the end of his term, and this would be a way to navigate around the consecutive language regarding the re-election. The MAS can also contest the constitutionality of the term limit rule in general by claiming it violates the basic right to seek election. As we've stated, there's an absolute majority of voters that have expressed a clear lack of support for a fourth term for Morales, but his team remains determined. They've resorted to using social media to promote their platform, and the conspiracy that the February referendum was actually a hashtag 21 Dia de la Mentira, a day of lies, and a plot by the opposition in the United States to undermine President Morales and skew the votes in the opposition's favor. The opposition have denied this wholeheartedly, but the referendum has in fact given them significant momentum and the opportunity to finally come across as a united front against the MAS. However, it is still true that within the opposition, there remains a lot of conflicting ideas, and this internal debate has prevented them from being able to publicly state a clear national alternative to the MAS political agenda. Without a definitive stance on how they would run the government, it is impossible for them to win the presidency. In contrast, the MAS has always maintained a very tight control within their party and has made sure to push the appearance of a single strong party leader. By not allowing for any internal dissent or debate, they've actually damaged their chances at finding a credible successor to lead the party. Since they never allowed for contrasting opinions within the MAS, there's no one within the party who truly represents political change and growth. The MAS have managed to be the dominant party for 10 years, but right now they're struggling to maintain their image of power and control, and the results of the 2016 referendum show that the people have taken notice.
October 2019, Bolivia held their general elections for the presidency. The race was between Evo Morales, running for his fourth term, against Carlos Mesas of the Civic Community Party. The race ended with a close victory for Morales, garnering only 10% more votes than Mesas, thus meeting the requirement for victory by the second voting round. This led to suspicion of election fraud and international calls to host a second round of voting, including calls by the OAS and the European Union. On the other hand, however, MAS accused the opposition of working with international backers to perform a coup d'etat against Morales. Large protests soon ensued, which led to Morales and the MAS government stepping down and promising another election the following year. Regardless of whether there was fraud or coup, this marks a significant turn in Bolivian politics as it marks the end of Evo Morales' presidency after a decade in office. This is best shown by the large decrease in support for Morales from the 2014 election, where he won with 61% of the vote, compared to the 47% he won in 2019. The second election was held a year later in October with an MAS victory led by Evo's successor and loyalist, Luis Acre, winning 55% of the votes. It is yet unclear to see how this situation will develop, as it is still currently developing.